On January 15th, 2026, an unprecedented alliance of 56 farm organizations sent an urgent letter to Congress declaring an existential threat was looming over many farms and warning that America's entire agriculture sector is on the brink. Their urgent plea followed a massive policy gamble, the 2025 law that doubled farm subsidies while cutting food aid for 42 million Americans. What did Congress miss that pushed the most unified farm coalition in modern history to sound the alarm? The truth behind this warning reveals a crisis far deeper than politics, and the consequences are only starting to unfold. 56 agricultural organizations, representing nearly every corner of American farming, signed their names to a single letter addressed to Congress. The American Farm Bureau Federation, the country's largest general farm group, organized the effort. The letter said America's farmers, ranchers, and growers are facing extreme economic pressures that threaten the long-term viability of the U.S. agriculture sector. This was not a routine policy request or another round of industry lobbying. It was a rare and coordinated alarm, one that brought together groups as diverse as the American Soybean Association, the National Cotton Council, Florida Citrus Mutual, and the U.S. Apple Association. Row crops, specialty crops, livestock, and agribusiness all stood behind the same warning. The letter described an existential threat looming over many farms, a phrase that had never before appeared in such a broad coalition's communications. For the first time in modern memory, the entire agricultural sector spoke with a single voice. The signatories did not just represent different commodities or regions, they represented the backbone of rural America, from the Midwest Corn Belt to California's orchards and the citrus groves of Florida. Brian Glenn, Director of Government Affairs for the Farm Bureau, summed up the urgency, saying, "The state of the farm economy is in bad shape. This is immense pressure." The letter's closing lines made the stakes clear. Without immediate action from Congress, the coalition warned, the future of American farming and the nation's food supply could hang in the balance. On July 4th, 2025, President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act into law, setting off a wave of debate across the country. The legislation bundled permanent tax cuts, expanded deductions for families and seniors, new funding for defense and border security, and a dramatic overhaul of long-standing social safety nets. Tucked into hundreds of pages were provisions that reshaped the foundation of American farm policy. The bill promised significant investments in agriculture, with expanded support for major subsidy programs. For many in Congress, this was pitched as a lifeline for the rural economy, an answer to years of mounting losses and financial strain. Yet the same law imposed deep cuts to nutrition assistance. Over the next decade, $186 billion would be slashed from SNAP and Medicaid, and stricter work requirements would be enforced. State governments were left to shoulder a larger share of the cost. The changes affected millions, with food assistance for roughly 42 million Americans facing new hurdles. What had once been a careful balancing act between farm support and anti-hunger programs was upended overnight. For decades, the Farm Bill relied on a coalition of farmers and ranchers on one side, and food security advocates on the other. That alliance ensured broad, bipartisan support. The new law broke that partnership. Every Democrat in Congress voted against it. Long-standing relationships between rural and urban representatives fractured. In the months that followed, the traditional political machinery behind American farm policy fell silent, leaving farmers and advocates alike scrambling for answers. Across rural America, the math no longer works. 6 core expenses: fertilizer, fuel, labor, interest, chemicals, and seed have climbed year after year, eating away at every dollar a farmer brings in. Fertilizer prices have surged, leaving growers to pay far more for the same yield. Fuel and oil costs have followed, rising sharply as supply chains remain unstable. Labor, once a steady line item, now strains budgets with higher wages and competition from other industries. For many, interest on loans has become the most punishing expense, with rates rising to levels not seen in a generation. Chemical prices, from herbicides to crop protectants, add another layer of pressure. Even the cost of seed, often purchased months in advance, has crept upward, squeezing margins on every acre. Yet as these bills pile up, the prices paid for corn, soybeans, wheat, and specialty crops have barely moved. In some cases, they have fallen. This imbalance leaves farmers facing a stark reality. Even record harvests cannot cover the cost of planting the next crop. A row crop farmer from Iowa put it plainly. Every year we are paying more just to get the crop in the ground, but what we get back at harvest has not kept up. We are running out of ways to make the numbers work. The erosion of profit is not theoretical. It is a daily calculation, and for many, the margin has disappeared entirely. Losses across American agriculture have reached an almost unthinkable scale. Over the last 3 years, the sector has watched nearly $100 billion slip away. Money that once sustained family operations, paid workers, and kept rural communities alive. Even with crop insurance and a patchwork of government programs, the red ink keeps spreading. Bankruptcy courts in the Midwest and the Central Valley report a steady rise in farm filings, a trend not seen since the 1980s. For many, the simple act of planting next season's crop is no longer a given. Lenders are growing cautious, asking tougher questions about repayment and the risk of another year in the red. The numbers only tell part of the story. In California, a specialty crop grower who has weathered decades of drought and market swings now faces a new kind of uncertainty. She says, "We have always found a way to make it work, but now, even after the insurance and the aid, we are still underwater. I cannot tell my workers if we will have jobs for them next spring." These are not isolated stories. Across the country, farmers who once prided themselves on resilience now question whether another season is possible. The gap between what it costs to farm and what the market pays keeps widening. The safety nets that once caught struggling producers are stretched thin, leaving more operations at risk of collapse. As the losses mount, so does the sense that something fundamental is breaking. One harvest, one farm, one community at a time. $12 billion in emergency aid was announced by the Trump administration in December 2025. Officials described it as a bridge for farmers battered by export losses and mounting costs. Yet the relief landed with a thud across much of rural America. The coalition of 56 farm groups welcomed the gesture, but their letter to Congress made the reality plain. Even after accounting for the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, crop insurance, and earlier emergency payments, losses for both principal and specialty crops remain deep. For many, the timing of the aid only added to the frustration. Most of the funds would not reach producers until late 2026, months after the critical spring planting season. The letter warned that these delays threatened the survival of thousands of operations. Farmers need a lifeline, it read, until that support reaches them in late 2026. The gap between promise and delivery had never felt wider. Banks in rural America are tightening their lending standards, sounding alarms that echo beyond the farm gate. Community lenders warn that without immediate bridge funding, entire towns could face economic freefall. A loan officer in Kansas puts it bluntly, "We are not just talking about a bad year, we are questioning if there will be a next year at all." The traditional safety net enhancements promised by the One Big Beautiful Bill will not arrive until October 2026, months after the spring planting season. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. Congress faces a shrinking window, with midterm elections making major legislation unlikely. The coalition's letter calls for emergency funding to fill the gap before March and April planting, and for restoring nutrition assistance as a foundation for rural stability. The message is clear. The health of the nation's food supply now depends on decisive action from lawmakers before the system unravels. Right now, America's food security depends on farms fighting for survival. As Congress stalls, rural economies unravel, and the future of domestic agriculture hangs in the balance. The question is no longer if help is needed, but whether action will arrive before it's too late. Share your thoughts below.